The night my world nearly fell apart began with something so ordinary that I almost ignored it. My 6-year-old son, Ethan, came home from school quieter than usual. Normally, he burst through the front door with endless stories about dinosaurs, superheroes, and whatever adventure had happened during recess. But that afternoon, he simply dropped his backpack by the couch and leaned against me. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm really tired." The moment I wrapped my arms around him, I felt the heat radiating from his tiny body. His forehead burned beneath my hand. I checked his temperature, 104 degrees. Panic settled into my chest. Within an hour, Ethan was struggling to breathe. His lips had turned pale, and his small hands trembled as he clung to mine. I rushed him to the emergency room, praying the entire drive that we weren't too late. The doctors moved quickly, blood tests, x-rays, Roman 4 lines, oxygen. I sat beside his hospital bed watching machines beep while nurses hurried in and out. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, the pediatrician entered the room with a serious expression. "We've identified a severe infection," she explained gently. "It's treatable, but we need to begin an intensive course of medication immediately." I nodded through tears. "Do whatever you have to do." Then came the sentence that shattered me. "Unfortunately, your insurance won't cover the specialized treatment. You'll need to arrange payment before we can continue with some of the medications." The estimate landed on the table between us, nearly $20,000. I stared at the number until it blurred. As a single mother working 2 part-time jobs, I barely managed rent, groceries, and daycare. My savings account held less than $800. I stepped into the hallway, leaned against the cold wall, and cried harder than I ever had before. But crying wouldn't save my son. I started making calls. First came my closest friends. One offered $200. Another promised $50. Someone else started sharing an online fundraiser. Everyone wanted to help. No one had enough. There was only one place left to turn. My parents, they weren't struggling. My father owned several rental properties. My mother spent more on monthly shopping trips than I earned in weeks. If anyone could save Ethan, it was them. With shaking hands, I dialed Dad's number. He answered after 3 rings. "What is it, Dad?" "Ethan is in the hospital." Silence. "He's very sick." I continued. "The doctors found a serious infection. They need to start treatment immediately." "So?" His single word felt colder than the hospital hallway. "I need help." "How much?" I swallowed. $20,000. He laughed. Actually laughed. $20,000. Are you out of your mind? "Dad, please. It's not for me. You've always made terrible decisions." My heart sank. "You chose to raise that child on your own after your divorce. Now you expect us to clean up your mess. It's your grandson. I warned you years ago," he snapped. "Actions have consequences." I could barely breathe. "Please, I'll pay you back." "With what?" he scoffed. "Your tiny paycheck." Before I could answer, Mom picked up the extension. I had hoped hearing her voice would make things better. Instead, it made everything worse. "Honey," she sighed dramatically, "you've always been emotional." "Mom, if we rescue you now, you'll never learn responsibility. My son could die." "Don't exaggerate." Her words hit harder than any slap. The hospital always makes things sound worse so they can charge more money. Tears streamed down my face. "Please, I'm begging you." Dad interrupted again. "You know what your problem is." I stayed silent. "You expect everyone else to fix your mistakes. My child isn't a mistake." "No," he answered coldly. "But your life certainly is." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he delivered the sentence that would echo in my mind for the next year. "Get through this on your own. Your problems aren't ours anymore." Click. The line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief. My own parents had just refused to help save their grandson. I returned to Ethan's room, forcing myself to smile despite feeling completely broken inside. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine. "Mom, I'm here, sweetheart. You won't leave me." I kissed his forehead gently. "Never." As he drifted back to sleep, I silently made a promise not just to him, but to myself, no matter what it cost me, no matter how many jobs I had to work, no matter how many nights I had to go without sleep, I would save my son. And from that moment forward, I would never again depend on the people who had called themselves my family. That night, as rain battered the hospital windows, I realized something heartbreaking. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the first to let you bleed. And I had no idea that exactly 1 year later, those same people would stand on my doorstep, desperately begging for the help they once refused to give. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. Every morning began in Ethan's hospital room and ended the same way. I slept in an uncomfortable chair beside his bed, waking every few hours whenever a nurse adjusted his Roman 4 or another machine beeped. I barely ate, barely slept, and lived on coffee and hope. The online fundraiser my best friend, Melissa, created started slowly. $20 here, $50 there. Some people I hadn't spoken to since high school donated without hesitation. A retired teacher sent $100 with a note that simply read, "No child should suffer because of money." Strangers cared more about my son than his own grandparents. That realization hurt almost as much as watching Ethan fight through his illness. To cover the remaining expenses, I sold everything I owned that had any value. My grandmother's wedding ring, my television, my laptop, even the small necklace Ethan had given me for Mother's Day. Every dollar mattered. When that wasn't enough, I picked up every extra shift my employers could offer. During the day, I answered customer service calls remotely from the hospital waiting room while Ethan slept. At night, after a volunteer sat with him for a few hours, I cleaned office buildings until dawn. I was exhausted, but every time I thought about giving up, I remembered my father's voice. "Your problems aren't ours anymore." Those words became fuel instead of chains. After nearly 3 weeks in the hospital, the doctors finally delivered the news I'd been praying for. "The treatment is working," the pediatrician said with a warm smile. "His infection is gone, and he's strong enough to continue recovering at home." I burst into tears. Not tears of fear this time, tears of relief. When Ethan walked out of the hospital holding my hand, the sunshine felt warmer than it ever had before. Life didn't suddenly become easy. Bills still covered my kitchen table. Collection notices arrived almost every week. Some nights I cried after Ethan fell asleep, wondering how I would ever climb out of the financial hole. But I refused to stay there. I had always loved baking. Friends constantly told me I should sell my cakes and homemade bread. One evening, after Ethan suggested, "Mom, your cookies make everyone smile," I decided to try. I started with 1 dozen chocolate chip cookies, then cupcakes, then birthday cakes. I posted pictures online, never expecting much. Orders began arriving faster than I could fill them. Customers loved that everything was homemade, and they appreciated the personal touches I added to every order. Soon, local cafes were asking if they could sell my desserts. Within months, I had transformed my tiny apartment kitchen into a small bakery operation. After a year of 12-hour workdays, countless sleepless nights, and more determination than I knew I possessed, I rented my first storefront. The grand opening exceeded every expectation. People lined up before sunrise. Many recognized my story from the fundraiser and wanted to support the mother who refused to give up on her child. By the end of the year, my bakery had become one of the busiest in town. The medical debts were finally gone. I bought a modest but beautiful home with a sunny backyard where Ethan could play without worrying about hospital visits or medications. His laughter filled the house every afternoon, replacing memories of machines and emergency rooms. For the first time in years, we were truly happy. Meanwhile, life had taken a very different turn for my parents. I heard bits and pieces through relatives. Dad had invested most of his savings in a risky business venture recommended by my cousin. The company collapsed within months, taking nearly everything with it. Mom had continued spending as though nothing had changed, refusing to believe they were in financial trouble until creditors began calling daily. One by one, they sold their rental properties, then their vacation cabin. Eventually, they even had to put their dream home on the market. Ironically, the same relatives they had always favored over me disappeared the moment the money ran out. No one answered their calls, no one offered a loan, no one invited them to stay. Then one afternoon, while scrolling through social media, my mother saw a local newspaper feature about my bakery. The headline read, "Single mother turns heartbreak into success after saving her son's life." The article showed smiling photos of Ethan and me standing in front of our bakery. Neighbors later told me my parents clipped that newspaper article and carried it everywhere. For the first time in their lives, they realized the daughter they had abandoned had built the very life they once claimed she would never have. And once they discovered I was successful, they suddenly remembered where I lived. Exactly 1 year after they refused to help save their grandson, there was an unexpected knock waiting to change everything. 1 year. 360. 5 days had passed since my father hung up the phone while his grandson lay in a hospital bed fighting for his life. In that year, everything had changed. Ethan was healthy again. The color had returned to his cheeks, his laughter filled our home, and every evening he raced across our backyard, chasing butterflies with the same endless energy he'd had before he got sick. As for me, I was no longer the frightened woman crying in a hospital hallway. The bakery had grown beyond anything I had imagined. We had a loyal customer base, 3 full-time employees, and enough orders booked weeks in advance that I had finally stopped worrying about every dollar. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and I had built every bit of it without my parents. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when someone knocked on the front door. Ethan looked up from the living room floor. "Mom, someone's here. I'll get it." I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my heart froze. Standing on my porch were my parents. For a moment, none of us spoke. My father looked older than I remembered. His expensive tailored suits had been replaced by a wrinkled jacket that no longer fit properly. His hair had turned almost completely gray. My mother looked exhausted. The confidence she once wore like expensive perfume had disappeared, replaced by forced smiles and tired eyes. Then, as if nothing had ever happened, Mom opened her arms. "Oh, sweetheart." Before I could react, she hugged me. "I've missed you so much." I stood completely still. She finally stepped back, pretending not to notice that I hadn't hugged her in return. Dad forced an awkward smile. "You've done well for yourself. I've managed. We saw the newspaper article," Mom said brightly. "We're so proud of you." Proud, the word almost made me laugh. A year ago, they had called me irresponsible. Now they were proud. Before I could answer, Ethan walked into the hallway. "Mom, who is it?" The moment my mother saw him, tears instantly appeared in her eyes. "Oh, my precious grandson." She rushed toward him, trying to hug him. Ethan instinctively stepped behind me. He barely remembered them. After all, they had never visited him in the hospital, never called on his birthday, never asked how he was recovering. To him, they were practically strangers. He tugged gently on my sleeve. "Mom, who are they?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. My mother's smile faded. I looked down at Ethan. They're your grandparents, he blinked, the ones who never come. Neither of them answered. Instead, Dad cleared his throat. May we come inside? Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. They walked slowly through the house, admiring everything. The place is beautiful, Mom said. You've decorated it nicely. Dad glanced around the spacious living room. This must have cost a fortune. I simply nodded. He smiled again. I always knew you'd succeed. That lie was almost insulting. I remembered every cruel word they'd spoken, every insult, every accusation, every unanswered phone call. For nearly 30 minutes, they talked about anything except the real reason they'd come. Finally, Dad sighed heavily. The truth is, here it comes. Things haven't been easy. I remained silent. The investments failed. He admitted, we lost almost everything. Mom quickly added, it wasn't our fault. We trusted the wrong people. I said nothing. Dad leaned forward. We're staying at a motel. They're raising the rates next week. Mom reached across the table, pretending to wipe away a tear. We don't know where else to go. Then came the words I had been expecting from the moment I opened the door. We were hoping, Dad hesitated, that you could help us. There it is, I said quietly. He frowned. What, the real reason you came? No, Mom interrupted quickly. We came because we missed you. I looked directly into her eyes. Really? She nodded too quickly. So why didn't you visit Ethan once during the past year? Silence. Why didn't you call? Silence again. Why didn't you even send him a birthday card? Neither of them could answer. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We thought you needed space. I couldn't help letting out a small, bitter laugh. Space. You hung up while your grandson was fighting for his life. Mom lowered her eyes. We made mistakes. I stood and walked to a drawer in the nearby cabinet. From inside, I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the original hospital bill. I had kept it all this time. I placed it gently on the table. Both of them stared at it. Then I unfolded another piece of paper. A handwritten note. I'd written it the night Ethan came home from the hospital. Across the top, in bold letters, were the exact words my father had spoken before ending the call. Your problems aren't ours anymore. The room fell deathly silent. Neither of my parents could meet my eyes. For the first time in their lives, they weren't the ones holding the power. And they were about to learn what it felt like to hear their own words spoken back to them. The silence in my living room was almost unbearable. My father stared at the faded hospital bill lying on the coffee table. My mother's hands trembled as she read the handwritten note beside it. Neither of them spoke. For the first time in my life, they had no excuses left. The proof of their betrayal was right in front of them. Dad finally cleared his throat. We didn't realize things were that serious. I looked at him in disbelief. You heard your grandson struggling to breathe over the phone. He lowered his eyes. I made a terrible mistake. No, I replied calmly. You made a choice. Those words hit harder than I expected. His shoulders slumped and the confidence that had once defined him disappeared. Mom reached across the table, tears rolling down her cheeks. Sweetheart, people change. I believe they can. Then please forgive us. I took a deep breath. I forgave you months ago. Their faces brightened for a brief moment. Then I continued, but forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. The smiles vanished. I forgave you because I refused to carry hatred in my heart. I did it for my own peace. And for Ethan, but forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. Dad leaned forward. We're family. I nodded slowly. Family. I looked toward the hallway where Ethan was quietly coloring at the dining table, completely unaware of the conversation. When he needed his family the most, where were you? Neither of them answered. When I begged you to help save your grandson's life, you laughed. My father's eyes filled with regret. When I cried, you called me irresponsible. My mother covered her face. When I said he could die, you told me I was exaggerating. The room became painfully quiet. I walked to a bookshelf and picked up a framed photograph. It showed Ethan standing outside our bakery on opening day, flour covering his little apron while he grinned from ear to ear. I placed the picture beside the hospital bill. Do you know who helped us? They remained silent, our neighbors, my coworkers, complete strangers, people who owed us nothing. They donated money. They brought meals. They watched Ethan while I worked. They became our family. I smiled softly. You two simply shared our last name. My mother broke down completely. I'm so ashamed. I know. Dad looked around the house one last time. We've lost everything. I know. We have nowhere to go. I know. He swallowed hard. Will you? Please let us stay here until we get back on our feet. I looked at the front door. Then back at him. Slowly, I picked up the handwritten note. I read the words aloud. Your problems aren't ours anymore. The color drained from both their faces. Dad whispered, please. I've spent an entire year remembering those words. I folded the note carefully. You taught me something that night. What? That when people show you exactly who they are, believe them. Mom sobbed openly. I don't want revenge. I don't want to hurt you. I simply won't allow the people who abandoned my child to become part of his safe place. I walked toward the front door and opened it. This house was built with sacrifices you refused to make. Every brick reminds me that we survived without you. I won't let those memories be replaced with new disappointments. My parents slowly stood. Neither argued anymore, neither blamed me. For the first time, they understood that some consequences couldn't be erased with apologies. Before stepping outside, my father stopped. I'm proud of the woman you've become. I met his eyes. I became this woman because you forced me to. He nodded quietly. I know. Without another word, they walked down the driveway. I watched them disappear into the fading evening light. When I closed the door, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I simply felt peace. A few moments later, Ethan ran into the living room. Are they gone? Yes. He wrapped his small arms around my waist. Good. I laughed softly. Why good? He looked up at me with the innocent honesty only a child possesses. Because every time someone knocks on our door, I only want people who love us to come inside. Tears filled my eyes. I hugged him tightly. They're the only ones who ever will. That evening, we baked chocolate chip cookies together, filling the house with warmth, laughter, and the sweet smell of vanilla. As I watched my son smile, I realized something important. The sweetest revenge isn't making the people who hurt you suffer. It's proving that their cruelty couldn't stop you from building a beautiful life. My parents lost their wealth. I gained something far more valuable, a home filled with love, a son who knew he was cherished, friends who became family, and a future no one could ever take away. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't slamming the door on your past. It's smiling because you no longer need to open it.